Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We're going to begin this evening with a little music to transition us from the week we just had into this Shabbat evening together. We join together in a wordless melody called a nigun. Feel free to sing along while you're watching from home. Yananai, Yababai, whatever works for you.
Yananai, nai, 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 yananai, nai, 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 yananai, nai, 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 yananai, nai, nai, yananai, nai, 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 yananai, nai, 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 yananai, nai, 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 yananai, nai, nai, yananai, nai, 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 yananai, nai, 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 yananai, nai, 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 yananai, nai, nai, yananai, nai, nai, nai.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. How are you?
I'm fine. I have to admit, this is not the same as being with you in person at the campus, but we'll get back there.
Well, we're going to get back there. We're going to get back there. We'll return to our homes for a little bit. But yeah, that was a pretty special experience being with you and the crew and all of the musicians. I didn't realize how much my musical soul had been starved during this year. And I've had little glimpses like that when we recorded for Passover, the High Holy Days. But man, it just felt good to be together and to celebrate Shabbat with other people actually there.
Yes. Luckily, you and I are doing plenty of B'nai Mitzvah lately, so we are seeing people and having a little bit of that, but it's not the same. It's a different experience, so I'm also looking forward to that. But at least we're all here together online. And Koleinu, our voice, as it's called, and what it's named for, is this idea that all of our voices can be a part of this experience. So even though we're not physically together, over the course of our service tonight, you'll have the opportunity to answer some prompts that we'll put up for you, but also to create your own community through chat. So feel free as the service goes on, even if we're not engaging with you and interacting with you directly, there is that opportunity for you to engage with one another and to continue to feel as though we are connected to one another, even though we may be in different parts of the city or different parts of the country, sometimes even different parts of the world from previous Koleinu services. So welcome. Hope you can engage with us and that you, for the next hour or so, can just let go of everything else that's been going on this week in the world, in your own life, and just take a deep breath. So why don't we try that right now? Everyone just take a deep breath.
I feel better already. So we're going to bring in Shabbat with the lighting of our candles. Join with me from home if you're able to. It's always a challenge to see if this will light on cue. But let's see. Perfect. Okay, we bring in the light of our Shabbat candles. 1, 2, and 3.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam נר של Shabbat.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We'll join together in our Kiddush, making holy and separating this time from the rest of our week into our Shabbat together with our online community. We join together.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho be'ahava uvratzon hinchilanu zikaron lema'aseh v'reishit ki hu yom techila lemikra kodesh zeichel yitziat mitzrayim kivanu v'acharta ve'otanu kidashta mikol hamim ve'shabbat kodshecha be'ahava uvratzon hinchaltanu baruch atah Adonai mekadesh HaShabbat.
L'chaim.
L'chaim.
And last but not least, the blessing over our challah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen.
V'te'avon, everyone.
Amen. So our first prompt for the evening is related to those candles that Cantor Lisa just lit. Where did you find light this week? When we think about all the things going on, one of the most important things about Shabbat, just like the sunset behind me, is to focus on that light, is to focus not on the diminishing light, but how can we strengthen that light? So feel free to add to the chat, where did you find light this week? And also take the opportunity to see where other people found light, because sometimes we can be inspired by the light of others.
Beautiful. We're going to begin our evening service with the Psalms, or some of the Psalms of Kabbalat Shabbat. Kabbalat Shabbat is a service that actually precedes the evening service, and the Kabbalists of Tzfat in Israel, the mystical side of our tradition, they would dress all in white, hence why on Koleinu we always wear white, and they would go out into the fields, and they would greet. They knew that there had to be some kind of process in order to enter into Shabbat. It wasn't this automatic thing to turn off the work week, turn off the stress, but that there was a gradual move into the calmness of Shabbat. So we're going to start with receiving the Shabbat with the words of Psalm 96, Yismechu Hashamayim, this idea that all of the heavens and the seas and all of nature are rejoicing with us as we celebrate Shabbat, that we're all connected as one.
Yismechu Hashamayim v'tagel haaretz yiram hayam umelo Yismechu Hashamayim v'tagel haaretz yiram hayam umelo Yamamai mai mamai yamamai mai mamai yamamai mai mamai mai mamai mai mamai yamamai mai mamai yamamai mai mamai yamamai mai mamai mai mamai mai mamai Yismechu Hashamayim
reminds me of our, November, Cantor Lisa, when we did our journey to Shabbat, and we used that as one of the musical settings for our journey. That I thought that was an amazing experience. I loved the creativity we put behind that. So that brought me back to the good old days of earlier times of the pandemic. We're now going to transition into Shalom Aleichem, and I realize that the same topic is repeating itself that I talked about last month, right before Shalom Aleichem. Right before Shalom Aleichem last month, I talked about the drop and the decline in the number of rabbinical students and clergy that were going through the process. I don't think it was just rabbis. I think even cantors, a diminishing number of students who are committing their lives to becoming clergy members in the Jewish faith. And this month, I just read recently in a Gallup poll that for the first time in 22 years or so, we've dropped below 50% affiliation of Americans who are affiliated with a church, a synagogue, a mosque. It's now at 47%, down from in 1999, it was at 70% affiliation. So we're seeing a significant decline. Now we can debate why that's happening. But I think my message, again, just like it was last month with Shalom Aleichem, this idea of these angels that are coming and centering us and surrounding us as we move deeper into Shabbat, is this idea of how are we going to buck that trend? How can we make sure that 47% affiliation doesn't continue to drop? How do we as an institution, I know we've doubled down on actually expanding our footprint. The idea that one of the ways to combat a diminishing affiliation is to create more spaces where people can feel connected. I know for me, one of the things that I think we are really good at and continue to work on is building the relationships with those who are connected to our community. Even though we are a large and ever expanding synagogue, how do we continue to deepen our connections individually? Just like all of you who are, chatting during the service and have chatted over previous services, how can we continue to build community when we are in person? Yes, but how do we also do that in this kind of platform? And how do we think that way into the future? Cantor Lisa, I'll put you on the spot and say, is there something, in addition to what I just said, is there something that you feel is necessary in order to help buck the trend of diminishing affiliation in this country?
That's a big question, and it's one that you and I have been discussing nonstop throughout this entire pandemic. But I think that what you said of that in this ever-growing, ever-expanding world, that we have to connect to people where they are. So if that's online, if that's in zip codes, if that's in kind of a new model of a chavarim, life is busy, life is chaotic, and being a part of a synagogue and being a part of a community shouldn't just be that like extra thing that you have to put on your already expansive calendar. We should find ways to engage outside of the temple. And it really goes in line with what our ancient ancestors did. We had the pilgrimage festivals in which everyone would gather all of their stuff and they would make a pilgrimage to go make their sacrifice at the ancient temple. And it was a giant time of community. And then you had basically the smaller shuls in everyone's town, and they all kind of would join together. So I think the more that we expand our minds of what community means and where community can take place, that is what's going to really kind of push Judaism into the future. We've always been a religious tradition and culture of change and evolution and changing with the times. And that's why a group of people that are so small in number have been able to continue for thousands of years. And I think we just have to keep pushing that envelope and questioning what community actually means in the year 2021 or 2041.
Yes.
That's my long answer.
Amen to that. And all of you, any ideas you have for us, anything that you've seen, anything that you believe are the keys in order to keep people connected, whether that's specific to Wilshire Boulevard Temple or the greater religious community, any ideas we are open to. So with that idea, this idea of openness, this idea of continuing to hopefully expand, but for sure maintain the community that we have, Shalom Aleichem is about surrounding ourselves with these angelic forces, these powers of peace, love, harmony that can guide us into a more peaceful future. So we continue with Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruchuni leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzidchem leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Now that we've gone through the motions of being able to receive Shabbat, we join together in the words of Lecha Dodi. The ancient mystics, as I said, would go out into the field dressed in white, and they would open their arms wide to welcome in the Sabbath bride, like it was a long-lost friend that they hadn't seen in, yes, just over a week. But we should all have that same excitement of having gotten through another week, gotten through the stress and the chaos. And yes, there are beautiful moments in the week as well, but Shabbat is really this time that we welcome with all of our heart and our mind and our body and soul, because we need it. We need that rest. We need that time to reflect. So we join in the words of Lecha Dodi. We're going to be singing verses 1, 2, and we'll rise, if able to, for the final verse to greet the Sabbath bride.
Lecha Dodi, Yalla la 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 likrat kala, Yalla la 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 penei Shabbat lekabela, Yalla la 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 lecha dodi, Yalla la 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 likrat kala, Yalla la 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 penei Shabbat lekabela. Shamor וזכור בדיבור אחד השביענו אל המיוחד, אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשם ותפארת Shabbat, לכו ונלכה כי מכל הברכה מראש מקדם משוכה סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה יאי לי לי יאללה לי לי לך דודי יאללה לי לי לקראת קלה יאללה לי לי פני שבת לקבלה. We rise if we're able to greet our Sabbath pride. בואי בשלום עטרת בעלה גם בשמחה ובצהולה תוך אמונה עם סגולה בואי חלה בואי חלה יאי לי לי יאללה לי לי לך דודי יאללה לי לי לקראת קלה יאללה לי לי פני שבת לקבלה יאללה לי לי לך דודי יאללה לי לי לקראת קלה יאללה לי לי פני שבת לקבלה.
During Passover, excuse me, Julie and I had a chance to get away, just the two of us, for a couple of nights. That was the first time in a very long time that we had time, just the two of us. It was a real gift that my in-laws were able to give us by taking care of our three children. And just being together and expressing our love for one another, being able to kind of just go back to those good old days of just hanging out together, made me think about Gary Chapman's 5 love languages, this idea that not only is it important for us to recognize how we express our love, but also how we like to receive love, right? This, and just a reminder for everyone, if you don't remember what the 5 love languages were, one was words of affirmation. So that's an action would be like sending a note, an unexpected note or text or card, physical touch, cuddling, snuggling, kissing, hugging. Receiving gifts is the third one, the idea of receiving a nice gift from someone you love. Quality time, just creating time to do something with the person you love, whatever that may be. And then acts of service, doing the dishes, doing other chores, doing something to support the other person. This next section of our service is all about love languages. It's our love language with God. After the Baruch Hu, the Shema is surrounded by this idea of love, 2 prayers about love, that we both have to recognize how we offer that love and how we're going to receive that love. So my question to you is, what's your love language? How do you like to receive love? Are you a person who loves words of affirmation? Are you someone who needs physical touch? Are you someone who likes to receive gifts? Someone who needs quality time with your loved one? Or are you looking for acts of service? So if you're willing to share, or at least just reflect on either what is your love language or one way in which you are expressing your love for the people you care about in your life, feel free to add that to the chat as we continue now with Baruch Hu.
Lai la lai 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 la lai 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 la lai 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 la lai 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 la lai 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 la lai 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 lai
know if you guys can hear, but there's this one bird that's kind of up there. And as I was doing the Baruch, it was like right in time chirping with me. And it's like so fitting because we're about to enter into the Shema, which speaks of this oneness of not only all people, but this oneness that we have with everything in the world. If we imagine that everything is God's creation, that means that we are all connected as one. Plants, birds, humans, you name it. So as we approach the Shema, I want you to close your eyes, take a deep breath, and just try to channel the idea of oneness. Feel yourself in your seat, feel yourself in your home, in your surroundings, and try to imagine what it feels as if we have these imaginary kind of strings that connect you to your neighbors, connect you to the dog walking down the street, this idea that we're all connected as one, just like I'm connected to that little bird that was up there.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed.
We join together in the words of the Ve'ahavta, words that are all about how it is that we show our love for God, however you imagine God's presence to be. And we do that through actions, through teaching our tradition to our children, by always having words of Torah, words of morals and values in our heads, in our bodies, each and every day. We join together in the words of the Ve'ahavta.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם להות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובישעריך למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם Adonai Elohechem Emet.
Back to statistics. According to the FBI background checks and their records that they keep, March was the most gun sales ever. 4.6 million background checks were done just in the month of March. And that overcame the last record, which was from January, which was 4.3 million background checks just in the month of January. We have more mass shootings again. Another innocent black man was killed in Minnesota recently. We continue to struggle with this idea of the freedom of the Second Amendment and also the need to be very aware of the fact that all those guns, there's still a lot of death out there. And so while I struggle with this element of maintaining freedom based on our Constitution and yet all the challenges that come with that, I'm also encouraged by the idea that also recently Biden, our president, has rolled back some of the restrictions that had been put on transgender participants in the military. Basically, in our previous president, under the previous president, they weren't able to serve at all. But now the opportunity exists for those who define themselves as transgender to enroll, enlist, and to participate in our armed services. So we have constantly this struggle between how do we define freedom in our country, in the world? How do we understand the mix of our own politics with our understanding of what it means to be a free person, how we want to help support freedom around the world. Just think about what's happening in Myanmar/Burma, the challenges that they're facing in that country. Sometimes we feel like there's nothing we can do, and other times we can feel the opportunity within us to bring about some more freedom, whether that's for ourselves, whether that's for our local community. So every day when we say Micha Mocha, we're given that opportunity. We're reminded that this concept of freedom, which we just experienced and talked about with Passover a couple weeks ago, is something that we need to be thinking about, fighting for, struggling with every single day. So we continue with Micha Mocha.
Micha Mocha ba'elim Adonai, Micha Mocha nedar ba'kodesh, Nora tehilot osei fele, Nora tehilot osei fele, Nora tehilot osei fele, Nora tehilot osei fele, Micha Mocha ba'elim Adonai, Micha Mocha nedar ba'kodesh, Nora tehilot osei fele, Nora tehilot osei fele.
As part of our evening service, oftentimes we'll offer the prayer of the Hashkivenu, in which we are asking for the shelter of God's presence. But tonight, I wanted to offer the words of Vishamru. Normally, we think of Vishamru as this jump around, the kids clapping, this upbeat song. But if we really listen to, these are words that come to us from Torah. And they're words that say that literally it is a sign of our covenant to God to not just celebrate Shabbat, but just as God rested in the biblical narrative when God created the universe, when God spent the entire week creating, that it is a commandment that we take that time to rest as well. And that is what Shabbat is all about. We cannot keep going through the grind without taking a moment for ourselves. So as we prepare to offer the words of Vishamru, I want to remind you that literally self-care is a commandment from our Torah. So I'm wondering, what are the ways that you are going to take care of yourself this Shabbat? Me, for example, not this Shabbat, but sometime very soon, I'm finally going to get a haircut because it's been over 2 years since I've had my haircut. And I need that moment of self-care, that moment to remind myself that I matter and that if I take care of myself, I can better take care of the people around me. We join together in the words of Vishamru.
Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat letorotam berit olam beni uvei bnei Yisrael oti leolam.
love how the birds join with you.
I think that bird thinks that I'm a bird. He literally, he or she, I don't know, but landed on the table right in front of me. I feel like Mary Poppins right now.
Oh, I was thinking more Cinderella, where whichever Disney character sings and all the birds come. Anyway,
I'm partial.
Now you have another bird.
I got airplane.
In a minute, we're just going to take a moment for silent reflection with silent Amidah. We'll begin with the opening lines of Amidah. And then afterwards, we have a very special treat tonight. We have Dr. Sivan Zakkai, who is an expert in Jewish education, focused on Israel education. And since we honored the fallen soldiers and victims of terror with Yom HaZikaron in Israel this week, as well as Yom HaAtzmaut, the birthday of our new state, we are going to have a little bit of a conversation about Israel and Israel education. So we'll have that after we have our moment of just silent reflection during the Amidah.
Anana na 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 Adonai. Anana na 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 Saitai Tiftach. Anana na 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 Ufi Yagid. Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha. Anana na 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 Adonai. Anana na 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 Saitai Tiftach. Anana na 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 Ufi Yagid. Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha. We give you a moment for silent reflections and prayers of your heart.
So we're very lucky on this Shabbat to have with us Sivan Zakkai. Most important of her bio and who she is, she's connected dearly to my wife, Julia. They've known each other for a very long time. So that's the most important thing about Sivan. However, there are a lot of other wonderful things about her. And especially for this Shabbat, the reason we brought her is to talk about Israel and all of her work around that. She comes from a long line of scholars and teachers. Her grandfather, Rabbi Zeldin, was the leader and creator, really, of Stephen S. Weiss up on the Hill. Her father is a Jewish educator. Her mother is a rabbi, and she is a Jewish scholar in her own right and a really phenomenal teacher. And just has brought some really interesting perspectives about Israel. So I want her to talk to us about that today, just to give a formal bio so everyone understands. She's the Sarah S. Lee Associate Professor of Jewish Education at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, and an affiliated scholar at the Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel Center for Studies in Jewish Education at Brandeis University. She directs the Children's Learning About Israel Project and co-directs Project Orly, Research and Leadership in Israel Education. And this upcoming year, her book, My Second Favorite Country, American Jewish Children and the State of Israel, will be released. So we get a preview of some of the content today. So for a place like mine, here at Wilshire Boulevard Temple and other synagogues, where we want to help the next generation. We want even adults to feel connected to Israel and feel like they have a strong connection. What have you learned from your research? Because I know you've been following some children for a long time, so I'd like to hear about that. What have you learned from your research, and what's going to come out in your book about how we can foster a strong connection to Israel? Do we have to do it differently than we've been doing it now for decades? Do we need to keep it the same? What's working, what's not working?
So the good news is, Rabbi Joel, I don't know if you've ever heard this narrative in the Jewish community, but there's a perception that young Jews are disconnected or they don't care about Israel. I've been following a group of Jewish children here in Los Angeles for many, many years. I started with this group when they were 5 and 6 years old in kindergarten. They're now 13 and 14 years old, just post B'nai Mitzvah. And they've been talking to me for years and years and years about their beliefs about Israel, their feelings about Israel, and I've been watching them change as they grow. And the good news is, for everyone worried that American Jews of the youngest generation do not care about Israel, you can all take a deep breath. At least the children that I've been following are really clear about the fact that they think Israel is an interesting thing to learn about, something they care about, something they want to keep learning about as they grow. They're also telling us, though, that the way that they've been taught about Israel needs to change. And one of the primary examples is in our talking and teaching about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in particular. Children have questions about the conflict, about Israel's relationship with Palestinians, with Arabs living in Israel, with its Arab neighbors, and they have these questions from a very, very early age, 5, 6, 7 years old, and they are often really frustrated that there's very little forum in Jewish educational spaces to learn about these questions, in part because many adults think these are questions for teenagers or for young adults, but kids have the questions too, and when we don't answer those questions, they often turn online and do untargeted internet searches without the help of adults.
So what are we supposed to do about that? How are we supposed to address that? Because I feel like that is the one area that everyone's so nervous to talk about.
Yeah.
Right? It's much easier to talk about hummus and camel rides and floating in the Dead Sea and the history of the country and how incredible a place it is and how diverse and dynamic it can be. But we have a lot of trouble being able to talk about those things. So what are the strategies that we should start to use? Because my assumption is that if we can use those strategies with children, we, even as adults who also steer away from some of those conversations, could also learn from those strategies. So how are we supposed to do it instead?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would say is hummus seems like an easy thing to talk about, Rabbi Joel, probably because nobody's ever challenged you on it. But can you imagine what would happen if your own daughters came to you and said, hey, I think you're withholding information from me. I think you're lying to me. I mean, yeah, everybody likes hummus, but there's not much substance there. And part of what they're asking is not for us to have the answers. Kids don't expect that adults have the answers, and they don't expect that we know everything. There's no current end in sight to this ongoing intractable conflict, and kids actually aren't looking for the answers. So the first thing that I would say is adults, we can release ourselves from the responsibility to have all the answers. What children are asking for is partners in having the conversations about the questions that animate contemporary Jewish communities. And those questions are often questions about things that we don't agree about. What should be the final status of Jerusalem? We don't know. But kids want to think about that with us. What should happen at the Kotel for egalitarian worship? We have ideas, but we don't have an answer. But that doesn't mean we can't talk about it with our children.
How does someone who is not trained, such as yourself, let's say I'm an adult with an adult child, let's say I have a child who is now out of college and is asking these questions and is wanting to engage with this conversation, but I don't necessarily have the tools that you have. What is a way in which a community in general can start to train itself to either ask certain questions or engage in these kinds of conversations that allow the next generation and even our peers to feel like we can really engage in this in a way that can be unifying if that's even a possibility, as opposed to divisive.
The American Jewish community perhaps will never again be unified on the question of Israel. And I know that some people feel great sadness over that, but it's just the reality. First of all, young people are going to make up their own minds. They're going to follow their own values. And that we as a Jewish community have done an amazing job of giving them so many options. Because 2 generations ago, Jews did not have this many options. We all had to give in a little blue box. And if you have raised your children to care, they will do so. They will care about this community, but they might do it in a way that's different than the way that you do that.
Okay. Thank you. That's really helpful. And I apologize if those watching, if there's some connection issues here. We're doing our best. The challenges of this type of interaction as opposed to having you in person. But I guess, are there any other final thoughts or anything else that we should be keeping in mind, especially this week as we celebrate Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut? Any final thoughts from your conclusion of your book that you want us to end with today?
We often don't like to talk politics, but actually politics is the most important thing for us to talk about, not because we agree, but because young people want to learn to talk about political questions. That doesn't mean they want you to tell them what to think about politics, but it means that they have deep and abiding questions about things like, what should Jerusalem look like? What should Israel's borders be? What should the United States policy vis-a-vis Israel be? What's the best way for us to create a just, caring, and Jewish community? And if we avoid those conversations because we know that they're political, then again, kids will, it's not that they won't think about those questions, it's just that they won't think about them with us, their trusted adults. And in order to be a safe place for kids, for teens, for young adults to think about Israel, grapple with real questions that many of us have about what the Zionist enterprise should look like, what we as progressive Jews should do about religious practice in Israel. These are real substantive questions. We have to be ready to talk about not only the parts where we agree, but the parts where we don't.
So appreciative of your time, appreciative of your friendship with our family, and really look forward to when that book comes out next year, and all the work that you're doing to help us think about, as we know, the word itself, Yisrael, he who struggles or she who struggles with God struggles with our tradition. That it sounds like you're suggesting that the way into a positive future of our relationship with Israel requires us to continue those struggles and to do so openly. So thank you very much, and Shabbat Shalom to you and your family.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. We're going to continue now with a beautiful setting of Yerushalayim Shel Zachav.
נישא ברוח
We now take a moment to offer the Misha Berach prayer as we do at every service, thinking about those in our lives who need extra strength, who need our prayers. Feel free to add any names of people whom you're thinking of who need our prayers in the chat tonight. We're thinking about all of them and sending them lots of love, support, and prayers.
Misha Berach Avotenu Mekod HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Misha Berach Imotenu Mekod HaBracha Le'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
Amen. Just a few announcements before we count the Omer and move to our concluding prayers of the service. Want to make you aware now that we have officially merged with University Synagogue. There are some new added bonus programs that we want you to be aware of. Particularly on Saturday evenings at 5 p.m., Cantor Kara Spencer Shapiro leads a Torah yoga, a phenomenal opportunity for you to do some yoga, but also to learn and to reflect and be with others in the community. So feel free to check that out. There's now Torah study at 9 a.m. on Saturday mornings with Rabbi Stanley Davids. So feel free to tune into that. And of course, many other programs that are in learning opportunities coming up in the coming weeks and months. So please make sure you check all of that out on our website or in the daily and weekly emails that you will get. So with that, we're going to move to the tradition that we do beginning during Passover and continue all the way until Shavuot, the counting of the Omer. Omer means sheaf, as in the sheaf of barley, because this was a harvest festival, as Cantor Lisa mentioned earlier, the idea that there were 3 pilgrimage festivals where Jews would come from all over the place to come to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices, to be together, one of those being Passover and the other one being Shavuot. Sukkot was the third. And so there's this tradition that every single day from Passover until Shavuot, we mark and count those days. Now, in a minute, Cantor Lisa will talk about some of the mystical understandings of this, but on a practical level, this really goes back to this idea of the importance that our tradition places on counting, on marking time. We are a people who are very clearly OCD when it comes to the power of time, the time of day, the time of week, the time of month, year, etc. And so it's really amazing. And if we were to think back on this pandemic, how easy it is sometimes for us to lose track of time. But our tradition would say, if anything, keeping a journal, figuring out how to mark time is such an important element of what it means to be Jewish. Cantor Lisa, you want to tell us a little bit about the mystical side of this?
Sure. So the mystics, the Kabbalists that created the same Kabbalat Shabbat service that I talked about earlier, they decided to make this a spiritual journey. There's 49 days between Passover and Shavuot. And during this time, in the biblical narrative, the Israelites are making their way. They're on a journey. They have to find for themselves what it means to be ready to accept Torah at Mount Sinai. And that each one of us, Passover is actually the start of the Jewish New Year. And so we have an opportunity to grow and improve by counting the Omer. And they've given each of the 7 weeks a theme. The theme for this week was Tiferet, which they translate as compassion, but also those 7 weeks, different iterations of it. So compassion, 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 love. There's 49 different themes that we count each day. So literally we are making each day count, and we are taking the time to focus on just one thing, not these big, huge New Year's resolutions, but just one thing. So the theme for this evening is called Yesod Shebetiferet, meaning what does it mean to have a foundation of compassion? True compassion is limitless. It's not an extension of your needs or defined by each of our limited perspectives. Compassion for another is achieved by having a selfless attitude, rising above yourself and placing yourself in the other person's situation and experience. So I want to ask you, as we think about compassion tonight, is your compassion compassionate or is it self-serving? Is it compassion that comes out of guilt rather than genuine empathy? How does that affect and distort your compassion? Do you express and actualize compassion and empathy in your heart? And if not, what is it that blocks you from expressing it? So we're going to say the blessing of counting the Omer, and then I'll tell you what night of the Omer we're on.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kirish mitzotav vetzivanu al sefirat haomer hayom 20 yom shehem shnei shavuot v'shisha yamim laomer.
Today is 20 days, which is 2 weeks and 6 days of the Omer.
Amen. Along the lines of counting, one of the things we always end our service with is an opportunity to count those memories, count the times that we spend with those who are no longer physically with us, but who we hold deep in our hearts. So we turn now to sharing the names of those that we're going to remember this Shabbat. We begin with Shloshim, those who have passed away during the past month. Marianne Fenster, Marshall Gelfand, Doug Gerson, Vera Halpern, Barry Kesser, Louis Lowy, Robert Gordon, Yosef Mabubianfard, Louis Gerald Miller, Michael Portis, David Wolf, Dorothy Wright. On this Shabbat, we commemorate the following yahrzeits: Adrian Edelman, Irving Applebaum, Solomon Baker, Lillian Barbakoff, Martin Barbakoff, Ronald Barbanel, Abram Barkin, Jack Becker, Zach Bell, Elaine Berkeley, Dorothy Berman, Muriel Berman, Rochelle Bernstein, Milton Bloomer, Gloria Jean Brody, Janet Burns, Joanne Chu, Solomon Cohn, Frida Dueck, Cecile Amer, Diana Francis Eisner, Lillian Evans, Helen Feldscher, Joanne Epstein Feldman, Robert Israel Feldman, Sylvia Fox, Sarah Frechtel, Arlene Fredgant, Evelyn Furman, Rose Gaines, Eugene Galen, Peter Gold, Corrine Goldsmith, Florence Goldstein, Yetta Goldstein, David Goodman, Sylvia Gottenberg, Lawrence Graff, Lou Greenspoon, Burnell Grossman, Paul Grossman, Bernard Harris, Milton Hollander, Dan Indersky, Larry Kartingainer, Fayette Carpel, Irving Kay, Louis Kind, Sarah Kleiman, Evelyn Cosberg, Suzanne Krakow, Frank David Crevin, Edith Leonard, Pamela Lever, Alfred Levin, Ruth Levine, Alice Levy, Betty Levy, Helen Levy, Shirley Levy, Clara Lichtenstein, Joshua Saul Lobenthal, William Lockheim, Beatrice Lowe, Rose Mann, Sam Miner, Helen Morris, Richard Mosk, Dustin Mullins, Lillian Naiman, Charles Nevels, Melinda Notkin, Helen Orland, Marcia Flug, John Ressler, Phyllis Rushover, Ethel Rosenfield, Richard Rothstein, Samuel Roth, Rhoda Sarnat, David Schneider, Harry Schnell, Arthur Schreiber, Evelyn Schuschman, Rita Sobalski, Manny Siegel, David Siegel, Ruth Siegel, George Schechtman, Herman Schrager, Ben Schreier, Richard Morton Sloan, Herman Solomon, Herbert Stein, Dorothea Stokes, Rose Tarshish, Annette Trustman, Cecia Ullman, Irving Walks, Pauline Walks, Philip Wainman, Lewis Wallace, Roni Wiesel, Jacob Winerance, Molly Daum-Wittrak, Phyllis Zemlak, Ronald Ziff. And keeping in mind all of those names, we continue now with the recitation of the Mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'kadash shemei Rabbah, Ba'alma divrach chirute ve'amlich malchute, B'chayachon u'v'yomechon uv'chaye d'chol Beit Yisrael, Ba'gala u'vizman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehe shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam almei almaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, V'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal shmei d'kudesha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehe shlama Rabbah min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen.
We conclude our service this evening with the prayer, Oseh Shalom, a melody that we all know and love that comes to us actually from Israel. It's not from Mount Sinai, but was written by Nurit Hirsch in 1969 as part of the Israeli Song Festival, a song created in the first, decade of a country's existence that has become a part of all of our Jewish identities, which goes to show that Israel, whether you engage with what's going on or the politics on a daily basis, is a part of each of our Jewish souls. We join in Oseh Shalom.
Oseh Shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Shabbat Shalom. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.